Reverend Traci Blackmon is an on-fire woman of God. Let us give her a big welcome.
Good afternoon. This is my first time in Little Rock. I'm glad this is the first time is with you all. Such amazing speakers that I've heard this morning. I heard myself referred to here as a preacher, and that is true. As an activist and an advocate, and that is true as well. But what I come to you today mostly as is a storyteller. Today is the 55th anniversary of the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing in Birmingham, Alabama. I am a native of Birmingham, went to school with one of the McNair girls, know this story and feel this pain intimately. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, during his investigation of that bombing, found out the names of the attackers, but he sealed those records to limit access to information gathered during the FBI investigation in order to ensure that that information could not be used to bring the murderers to trial. For 14 years after the bombing, none of the men were prosecuted for their crime. The first one to be arrested and convicted was Robert Edward Chambliss, and that did not happen until 1977. And then in the 2000s, then prosecutor Doug Jones was able to unseal those records to find the information that he needed to bring successfully to trial two of the other attackers, Bobby Frank Cherry and Thomas Edwin Blanton. The fourth man died free, having never been charged at all. All but one of the men are dead now, having lived the majority of their lives as free men. I tell this story, and I speak these little girls' names: Addie Mae Collins, Denise McNair, Carol Robertson, and Cynthia Wesley. I tell this story because race matters. Race is not a biological thing. Some will say that race is a figment of our imaginations. And in some ways that is true. But whether or not you believe race to be a thing or not, what is undeniable is that racism is real. I compare that story to Christmas Eve 2014. One of the activists and advocates in Ferguson, Missouri, an 18-year-old by the name of Josh Williams, joined in an unlawful act of rage over the death of the latest victim, Antonio Martin, at a gas station in a nearby neighborhood. Antonio would make the third unarmed black man killed in St. Louis by police since the killing of Michael Brown in August. When Antonio was shot by law enforcement in a gas station where he stopped to get a soda, and when questioned by the law enforcement officer, went to reach for his wallet and was accused of perhaps reaching for a weapon, and the police officer feared for his life and shot him dead there. Frustration grew over this latest state-sanctioned murder. And so did the tension between law enforcement and protesters. And as the crowds began to gather and protests began to erupt, the gathering began to spill over into the premises of the Quick Trip that was across the street. The gas station where the murder happened now was filled with yellow tape. And a few of the people who were gathering there in that crowd became destructive in their rage and started vandalizing the Quick Trip. The vandalism was wrong. I offer no excuses for this behavior. I offer no excuses for a city in which the daily taunting and targeting of black youth who dare to protest their mistreatment have become routine. I don't offer excuses for that either. But by December, everyone knew the pattern. When, not if, there was a killing of a black person in the community, protesters would show up. I'm reminded of the African proverb, the child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. To be clear, the black youth I'm talking about in Ferguson were not embraced by the village. And because I'm going to take the instructions of Miss Ruby, I don't know if she's still here, who said just tell the truth, they weren't embraced by the outside village, and neither were they embraced by the church. All right. So protesters would show up, whether that death was due to police violence or whether it was due to communal violence. Protesters would show up to stand with families and to hold police accountable and sometimes to hold one another accountable. And Josh showed up at this protest. He did not choose to steal from the store. That was not his crime. He did not choose to destroy property inside the store. That was not his crime. But in his rage, in his frustration, in his fury, he set a fire to the trash that was in the trash can outside of the Quick Trip. The fire was quickly extinguished, and by all accounts, damage was limited to the trash can itself. A few days later, after watching video of the riot, police surrounded Josh as he was walking in his neighborhood, and they arrested him. And Josh spent the next year in jail waiting for a trial. Because Josh's mother could not afford to get him out on the bail that they had set. So Josh sat in jail for the next year waiting to be tried. And when it was his turn, he was charged with arson and looting because he was present. His public defender recommended that he plead guilty. 1 year later, Josh was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Because according to the judge's own words, he needed to make an example out of him to stop other protesters from coming in the streets. Yes, the trash can fire provided a reason to lock him up, but racism sealed this deal. Josh has spent more time in prison now than anyone associated with the state-sanctioned killing of Michael Brown Jr. Josh has spent more time in prison for a trash can burning than any law enforcement officer in the state of Missouri has ever spent for the state-sanctioned murder of anyone black. Josh has spent more time. Black Americans are incarcerated in state prisons across the country at more than 5 times the rate of whites, and at least 10 times the rate in 5 states: Iowa, Minnesota, New Jersey, Vermont, and Wisconsin. Arkansas missed the list. In 11 states, at least 1 in 20 adult black males is in prison. 41 of the 60 police departments disproportionately kill black people relative to the population of black people in their jurisdiction. And I wish I could show you the graphic that I have. I didn't put it up for them to share today, that there is absolutely no correlation between where police are killing black people and communal violence. Why is that important? Because the media and the messaging would have you to believe that these violent acts are happening because these areas are so bad. When in fact, there is no correlation. between the places where black people are dying by police violence and the places where communal violence is the highest. Senator Elliott said something, and she didn't say it this way, but it resonated so much with me today. Race is always a factor. You can go to whatever school you want to go to. Your skin is still a factor. You can have a two-parent household, one-parent household, no-parent household, the whole village living in the house. Race is still a factor. You can be poor, you can be middle class, you can be upper class. Race is still a factor. I listened to her say that it took 5 years to even get enough traction in legislation to have a racial impact statement. Yeah. She wasn't even asking you to let anybody out. Right. Just acknowledge that it's a factor. I think it hit me so hard, Senator, because I see this up live and personal in Ferguson all the time. And let me be clear, when I say Ferguson, I'm not just talking about the municipality that many of you like to come visit. I am talking about St. Louis. St. Louis is Ferguson. And there's no need to come and tour with us because there is a Ferguson somewhere near you. In Ferguson, there are 88 municipalities in St. Louis County. There's St. Louis City, and then there's St. Louis County. Ferguson is one of 88 municipalities in St. Louis County. 58 of those municipalities maintain their own police department. 81 of those municipalities have their own court system. What was happening in Ferguson that's relative to here, and this is verifiable by the Department of Justice information, it was possible to take a 45-minute trip through St. Louis County and cross 6 municipalities and get 6 tickets for the same broken headlight you had in the first municipality. You understand what I'm saying to you? It was possible to rack up 20, 30 citations on one stop. This was the way that the municipalities were funding their resources. So while I agree that children need to be educated, while I agree that we need better schools, that's a conversation we can have another day, we certainly need those. While I agree that parents need to be more involved, I really don't think that this system changes until law enforcement officers and people not just on the street as police, but in the court system and judges. One I know here who's working very well that way, Judge Griffith. Until our court systems and our law enforcement officers are forced to take racial bias training, sensitivity training, awareness training, not just one time for a diversity class, but as a part of their continuing education because things change, until they take cultural sensitivity changing, until we move back to neighborhood-based policing where you actually have to live with the people you are arresting. Until we form civilian oversight boards that have teeth to them. Until we demilitarize public schools in poor neighborhoods. Until we stop training children to put their hands up and have their pockets searched even before they learn their ABCs. I'm talking about St. Louis. I don't know about Arkansas. Until there is police accountability. It has taken St. Louis, I don't know if you know this, but it's important here in terms of voting. When Michael Brown Jr. was killed, it was 4 days after an election. In that election, we had a bad sister named Leslie Tolliver who was running for prosecuting attorney. We also had Robert McCullough, who had been in that position for 23 years, prosecuting attorney. Half of his family are law enforcement officers. His father was a law enforcement officer, may he rest in peace, who was killed violently by a black man in a drug raid. He would have been a law enforcement officer had he not had a medical problem that prevented him from serving as a law enforcement officer. If that is your background, that shouldn't preclude you from being a prosecuting attorney, no. But it should play a part in what kind of cases you might recuse yourself from. Right. It should play a part in what kind of cases you would bring in someone else to oversee the case so that no one could accuse you of bias even if you didn't think you had any. Robert McCullough never recused himself from any case of law enforcement killing black people in St. Louis. And when it came to Michael Brown's case, he convened a grand jury that gave the jurist the wrong law that he didn't correct until the day before they gave their verdict. It took us waking up because he became the prosecuting attorney for another 4 years. And this year he was so confident that he would win again that he came to no public forums for people of color, put no money into campaigning in black neighborhoods, and is still pouting and stomping because he got beat. So when I hear Ms. Ruby say that we're missing peace by 18 inches, connecting heart and head, I know that she was talking about her friends and all of our family, because we're connected, who are still behind bars. But I want to caution us that when we cage people, we too become prisoners. And we are missing our peace because our heart and head are not connected. The more we cage people, the more inhumane we become. And eventually they are going to come out without any rehabilitation and without any gratitude for those who allowed them to lose their lives living while dead. So my friends, this problem with incarceration is not just one that we can study from a distance. It is one that impacts all of us. It is one whose trauma I live with daily. With the work that I do, I have 2 black sons. One is 27 and one is 26. And one of the ways that it has shown up in my life is that I can't pass by a police stop until I know who's in the car. That's trauma. I can't trust you with my children the way some other people may be able to trust with theirs. After Ferguson, we started a group called Mother to Mother. And we brought together white mothers and black mothers. And it started off with black mothers telling the stories about how we have to train our children to respond whenever they're stopped by police. How we have to have the conversation about where to put your hands and where to keep your license and what to say, and how we have to say to our children, the only goal you have is to come home alive. How we have to say to our children, whether the officer is right or whether the officer is wrong, don't argue. Just come home alive. And we sat with mothers who never have to have that kind of conversation. Mothers who never have to think about that. Pastors and preachers who never have to include self-preservation in their sermons. And we asked them, having heard what conversations we're having, what conversations are you having? What conversations are you having in your homes? Not just at conferences, at the dinner table, at Thanksgiving, at Christmas. What kind of conversations are you having so that together we can put an end to a system that does not work? The only people that are benefiting from our present prison system are those who are investing in it. And the only reason we have it is because it's making money. It is inhumane. And I am honored and proud to be here with you today. Those of you who know we must make a change. We must make a change, or we will be our own demise. Thank you.
Of
I appreciate it. I also want to say that I came late to this game because I live in a suburb, and I thought that my children were protected. I came late to this game. So don't stand for me. Let's stand for the ones we got to fight for now. Amen.